and a channel dedicated to exploring the creation of everything. If there's one material I've explored deeper than anything else, it's glass. This year marks 10 years since the first time I touched this topic, and I've gone through an extensive journey in the process that's taken me around the country, collecting strange minerals and collaborating with various experts. In this time, I've learned a ton, and I thought this would be a great time to revisit this journey with some added commentary, looking back now 10 years later. My channel started with a chicken sandwich, which blew up across media at the time. But what really turned this initial project into a now decade-spanning sustainable YouTube channel was my exploration of glass. The first topic to cover glass was a bottle episode I did, exploring various historical methods of making vessels that can hold water, growing gourds, hollowing out ostrich eggs, making my own clay, and learning how to throw ceramics. And then lastly, a glass bottle. I started at this point like most people, a base understanding of glass. You take sand, make it hot, it turns into glass. Done. Little did I know there's a little bit more to that, which gets completely glossed over in my first video on the topic.
Glass is made from silica, the major component of sand. When it is heated, it melts into a fluid. Even after cooling, it manages to maintain many fluid characteristics, such as transparency, as it turns into an amorphous solid. Glass can be found naturally in the form of obsidian, formed by quickly cooled lava from volcanoes, and it was frequently used as a sharp blade in the Neolithic age. Actual glass making was invented around 3500 BC in Mesopotamia, and the first glass container was made around 1500 BC. Improvements in glassmaking technologies in the 17th century eventually resulted in the glass bottle becoming the preferred storage medium for wine and other fluids. But to first make my glass, I'll need to get some sand. I'm here at the bank of the Mississippi collecting some of the sand. This is the same sand that they use down at the Ford plant to make windshields. Next I'm just gonna collect some. I'm gonna head over and melt it down into glass. After collecting my sand, I took it to the Minnesota Center of Glass Arts, where Michael showed me the process of melting down the river sand. Using a makeshift furnace, he had me add the sand in controlled amounts and heated it up to over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit until it began to melt. Then, using a rod, I collected some of the newly formed glass, revealing a unique blue tint from the impurities in it. He even demonstrated how to turn it into a bottle. However, the impurities in the sand make it really difficult to blow. So to make my bottle, they had me use some of their already prepared sand. First, I loaded up the furnace with sand, which melts it down to molten glass at 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit.
You want to aim that right for the middle. All set? Get a big scoop.
Next, Nicole walked me through the process of blowing my own glass bottle.
So never put your hand above the glass because you'll get a steam burn. So you're always shaping it from the bottom, but because you're rotating it, you're shaping the whole thing. Okay, that's pretty nice. Why don't you get some heat and then we'll blow it a little.
Okay. I found the most challenging part of glass blowing was the multitasking. If I ever forgot to keep the rod spinning, it'd all start to fall off, and I'd ruin it.
figured. Okay. So when you make a bottle, you pull that neck shape when it's being blown, which also means that it makes it difficult to get a good jack line for it to break up. It's probably plenty good. Okay. Okay, stop moving. I'm gonna grab you. So try not to hit the cupboard behind you when you lift this up, okay? Ready? Okay, flip, flip, flip. Okay, carry it over there. All right, on, now, on. It's good, off. Well, it's about as bottly as a bottle gets. If it's handmade.
With the glass completed now, it needs to be left in the kiln to slowly cool over the next few days.
Nice.
Otherwise, it'll explode.
Whether I'm melting bronze, working glass, or building from scratch, proper protection is always important. Perhaps most important includes my feet. The sponsor of this video, Brunt, sent me a new pair of boots to keep me safe. And honestly, I'm impressed with how comfortable they were right out of the box. No break-in period, no sore feet after one day, just actual support and a footbed that feels like it was made for this kind of work. Brunt designs their boots with real workers in mind. These boots aren't just comfortable, they're built to last. The leather holds up in even tough, wet conditions. The outsoles are oil, heat, and slip resistant up to 572 degrees, which if you've seen what I work with, could come in handy. And here's the best part, Brunt lets you try them out on the job. If they don't work for you, send them back, no questions asked. Use my code to get $10 off your first pair today. Seriously, your feet will thank you. This first video opened the door, both for first understanding the process of glass blowing, but also an introduction to the process of turning sand into glass. What we glossed over, as at the time it felt kind of irrelevant, was that the glass blowers I worked with added some store-bought flux to the sand. Extra chemicals that lowered the melting point of the mix and made it possible to work with it. This ingredient, which I neglected to even mention in the video, is what proved to be the most important aspect of trying to make glass, as I learned through the rest of my journey. Technically, you can make glass with sand alone, but it's a whole different process, and it's not the type of glass you deal with every day. This first video on glass proved to be one of my more popular videos in the early days, so naturally I wanted to double down on this topic and actually make all the ingredients for the glass, and take things to the next level and make my own eyeglasses. Around the same time, an author covering very similar topics reached out to see if I wanted to collaborate, Louis Dartnell. He had been experimenting with making glass from scratch himself and had some suggestions of where I could source some ingredients for the flux.
When it comes down to the essentials for survival, we usually think of the basics: food, water, shelter. However, for the 75% of adults in the world that have less than perfect vision, corrective lenses might be almost just as important to them. With something so crucial as allowing yourself to be able to see, how hard would it be to make them yourself? Well, that's what I'm going to try and do. Starting from the most basic materials, I'm going to attempt to make my own prescription eyeglasses. But before I begin, I want to reach out to an expert with some experience in this endeavor and get some advice. So I looked up Louis Dartnell, author of The Knowledge, where he attempts to provide all the information you need to rebuild society from scratch. While researching his book, he went through the process of making his own glass from scratch. Since I'm attempting to do something similar, I sought out his advice.
So for glass you need silica, which you can get from sand. You need something to help you melt that silica at reasonable temperatures in a kiln, and that's called a flux. And you can use soda ash or potash as a flux, which you can get from seaweed. And lastly, you need lime, which you can get from coral or sandstone or chalk. So it turns out that all of the main ingredients from glass you can collect on exactly the same beach. And I went to a beach in Norfolk, in East England, and I collected all those things from the same place, and over the course of a day made glass from scratch from the stuff that we'd harvested from the natural environment.
A little bit different for me because I'm located in the center of a continent. Getting the sand and the limestone shouldn't be a problem, but I don't think I could get seaweed or anything like that. Can you tell me more about the potash?
Rather than burning things like seaweed, you can burn hardwood timber. That timber collects potassium carbonate, or potash, as it was known through history. So it's a slightly different chemical, slightly different compound, but it performs exactly the same function as a flux for helping to lower the melting point of your silica to make a glass.
Thanks for your help, Lewis. I think that should get me started in the right direction.
Excellent stuff. Good luck with that, Andy, and definitely let me know how your making from glass project goes. I'd love to see the results.
With Lewis's suggestions, my first step is gathering the raw items I'll need: sand, limestone, and hardwood ash. Starting with the sand, I tried to find the whitest sand available near me, off the bank of the Mississippi River, and then strained out any extra pebbles or other debris that might have been mixed in.
Red, come in. Sorry. Hey. Super friendly.
On the way back, I managed to find some limestone and collected a few rocks. Then later, I pulverized them into a powder. That just leaves one last ingredient, the hardwood ash. As a safety note, if you decide to use an accelerant to start a fire, make sure you know what exactly you're using. Because apparently some fuels can be more explosive than you expected. With my 3 ingredients collected, I turned to Michael, a glass blower who agreed to help me to test out my ingredients and see if this was even going to work. What I got back was something very far from actual clear glass. At this point I realized my mistake. In haste, I had forgotten the very important step of actually separating the potash from the rest of the ash residue. So I'm going to need to get some more ash. This time I very cautiously and slowly built up the fire. To extract the potash, I first soak the ashes in water. The coals and lighter debris will float to the surface and can then be skimmed off. The potash, or potassium carbonate, will dissolve into the water, and all the other unwanted minerals from the ashes will sink to the bottom. Then I just need to boil the water down until I just have the powder of the potassium carbonate left. So I've spent about 30 hours boiling water now, and I boiled at least 20 gallons of water. End result of all that is this. And weighing it out, it is only 182 grams. That is maybe enough. Unsure about the quality and quantity of potash I had produced, I visited Michael, and we performed one more test of my ingredients. He carefully measured everything out to the proper proportions, mixed everything together, then he heated the sample to see if it would produce anything close to glass.
That was a good test.
Confident in the results, we can move on to a full-size batch. But first, since we were only going to be able to produce a small quantity of glass because of my limited supply of potash, I decided to do a practice round with some of Michael's regular glass. Once cooled, I used a diamond-tipped drill bit to cut a bunch of discs out of the bulb. Next, the hard part, shaping the lenses into my correct prescription. Using a series of abrasive wheels, I slowly ground my lenses into the correct shape and then polish them clear again. Because I'm nearsighted, the lenses will need to have a concave shape. Fortunately, since I started with the curved glass from the bulb, all I need to do is grind the outside face a little bit shallower to achieve a concave lens. The best way I found to measure the curvature of my concave lenses was to use a laser pointer. Because a concave lens is refracting light outward, its focal length, or where the light converges, is actually negative. Therefore, I figured I can measure the point where the light diverges the beam twice as far than if they had been parallel. The inverse of this number should then be my focal length of my lens. In my instance, I measured a ½ inch from the center of the lens, and then found out at which distance the lens would refract it to be a full inch off. Thanks to my visit to the optometrist Dr. Saber before, I know what focal length I need to be at to match my prescription. However, I'm only able to shine the laser pointer through the lens after it's been polished. So this makes it a lot of guess and checking, then having to redo all the polishing once again. If the focal length is still longer than my prescription, that means I need to keep going and grind it down even further. If it's too short already, that means I've gone too far and I'll need to start all over again with a new lens. After spending the better part of a whole day grinding my lenses, I now have the completed ones, so I'm just going to measure them one last time, make sure they're right, and compare them to my actual glasses. While my method is obviously not the most accurate, as far as I can tell, I'm pretty close to spot on with my lenses. Now that I've gotten the hang of grinding my own lenses, I'm ready to attempt it with a glass I'm actually making from scratch. Because we were working in such a small commodity, I didn't have enough to blow a bubble. Instead, we were going to pour it into a flat mold.
As long as we kept it thick, we could slump it over a form, and that gets you halfway there, and then you'd have to grind out by hand a concave surface. I'll go in and I'll just kind of poke at it. You can see it's just starting to kind of form together there on the surface. That's pretty cool.
After heating it in the kiln for several days, it was finally ready to pour.
Oh dear. Pretty gnarly stuff.
Once poured, it just needed to cool overnight in the kiln, and then I could apply the same grinding technique to these lenses as well. But in the meantime, I'm going to make the frames to actually hold the lenses onto my face. After the struggle of making the glass, let's try a material that's a little simpler: wood. After felling my tree, I chopped the tree trunk into some workable sized boards. But because this tree is freshly cut, it contains a lot of moisture that will eventually dry out of it and cause it to crack and break. Generally, wood is only ready to be used after it's been left to slowly air dry for up to a year or two, or if it's been slowly baked in a kiln for up to a month. However, I don't quite have that much time to wait, so I'm just going to throw it in the microwave. By microwaving it in short bursts, and carefully measuring how much moisture weight is lost, I can slowly dry these boards out in about an hour. Once there is no longer any measurable amount of weight lost between bursts, I know it's dry. However, you do need to be careful, because if you overdo it, it's going to start on fire. With my now dry wood, I can make my frames. since I still have my practice lenses and a fair amount of wood, I thought I'd reach out to a woodworking expert and see how great of frames he could make for me. So together with the lenses and my microwave wood, I mailed them to David at Make Something to see what he could come up with. Check out his video on his channel to watch the entire process he goes through to make me an even better set of frames. So I just got the package back from David. Let's see how his frames turned out. Oh wow. Nice. Wow, these turned out pretty good. Ooh, the head's a little big. All right. Wow. That is pretty good. This is awesome. Great job, David. These frames turned out great. My glasses are a little bit different, particularly the glass. So I had a little bit of an issue that is not the clearest stuff. If you look close at it, there are parts of it that are trying to be clear. I can see some light through this, but I cannot see anything. So in that regard, my glasses were not the best of successes, at least in making them clear. But if I had been able to get them clear, I'm sure I could have gotten them actually prescribed to my eyes like these. Like these are pretty close. Overall, I can see a lot better than I could without them. But I'm gonna check in with Lewis and see if he has any suggestions on how I could have done this better. All right, Lewis, so these are my final glasses.
And can you even see me? Can you see anything at all through those glasses?
I can see a little bit of light, that's about it.
You can tell if it's night or if it's day. I think you've nailed the invention of spectacles in history. Well done, sir. So from my point of view, what I can see here, well, I mean, two things. It looks a little green. It looks quite tinted green. And it looks quite opaque. It looks almost frothy in there. It's called seeding. I think there's a lot of tiny bubbles that have got caught in that glass as you're melting it in your kiln. The sort of things you can do to try and solve that, maybe trying to leave it in the kiln for a bit longer so that the glass is molten and it gives a longer opportunity for the gas to escape from that glass, for the bubbles to escape and not get trapped when it re-solidifies. Maybe try re-purifying the potash that you've got, because as I say, the key component is that flux that helps reduce the melting point and viscosity of the glass. That'll help the bubbles escape as well. And I think the reason you've got a bit of a green tint there is maybe your sand, your silica had some iron impurities in it, will make the glass come out slightly green tinted, which, you know, I mean, that's fine for a bottle of wine. But I think for your pair of glasses, it'll get a little bit irritating, it being green the whole time. You're looking at the world through green tinted glasses.
So what would you recommend I make next?
Oh, well, now that you've made a pair of spectacles, and to be honest, I use spectacles in the broadest sense of the word, I reckon you should step up a bit. And the next thing you should try is to use your lenses in combination with each other and make something like a telescope or a microscope from scratch. And maybe see if you can use your telescope to see the moons orbiting Jupiter, which Galileo was able to see over 400 years ago when people first started turning telescopes towards the heavens. So I'd love to see if you could pull that off.
Definitely, I'll have to try that next.
Yeah, challenge accepted. Okay. Well, let's know how it goes. And I look forward to hearing back from you, Andy.
Thanks again. Special thanks to both David at Make Something. Be sure to check out all of his amazing wood making videos. As you can tell from my glasses, he does some really amazing work, so be sure to check out his videos. They're quite good as well. And also thanks to Lewis for his assistance and guidance with this. Be sure to check out his book, The Knowledge. It is a really amazing book and something I am probably going to be referring back to in future episodes. And this is where the difficulty of optical glass making first becomes apparent. Reviewing the footage now, I'm still confused what exactly happened with my first attempt at extracting potash. Despite going through a lot of steps of straining out and separating the insoluble elements along the way, there was still a lot of impurities left in the final product, which is what made it oddly green-gray. But I wasn't going to give up yet. Lewis Darnell had pointed me to the idea of making a microscope. It was actually a lot simpler to make than I had thought. This seemed like the perfect excuse to give it a second shot at purifying the compounds and hopefully getting a better result.
Previously, I explored making eyeglasses and correcting my vision to see clearly. For my next project, I'm going to go to the next step in the evolution of optics and allow myself to see beyond human sight, to see the unseen, and make a microscope. The invention of the microscope helped revolutionize science and led to the discovery of microorganisms and germ theory, which has helped save countless lives. For some assistance making my microscope, I sought the advice of Max at Foldscope. Foldscope was invented as a cheap and affordable option for microscopes. Made mostly out of paper, they cost less than $1 to produce, yet allows you to view at 140 times magnification, making it possible to see bacteria and cells. Hi Max, thanks for talking to me. So for my next project, I'm looking to make a microscope from scratch. Compared to a large or expensive microscope you normally see in a class from a lab, you guys went with a different format with your Foldscope. Can you tell me about that?
The idea behind a microscope is really simple, which is when light hits a boundary, say between air and glass, it bends. And you can use this property to take a small image and make it much larger. So most research microscopes you see are complex microscopes, which use a series of lenses to provide magnification and correct for aberrations. But you can get away with a simpler strategy, which is actually just to use one very small spherical lens, and this is called a simple microscope. And so the smaller the lens, the sharper light is bent when it crosses the boundary between air and glass, and the more magnification you get. So for instance, with Foldscope is 2.38 millimeters in diameter, and it provides 140x magnification. And so these simple microscopes are actually really similar to microscopes that were made by a Dutch draper named Antony van Leeuwenhoek back in the 17th century. But van Leeuwenhoek used the same principle as us, which is actually to use just a simple small lens. So Antony van Leeuwenhoek actually discovered many microorganisms just by looking at pond water using his simple microscope, and is kind of considered the sort of founder of microbiology.
So what exactly goes into making a microscope like yours?
If you think about it, there's not too many things you need to do, right? You need to be able to hold a sample in place and provide magnification with that lens. But then most of the other functions besides the lens can be provided by paper. And so we use a folded sheet of paper to hold the lens and hold the slide, and then to align the two. And it turns out that paper, if you think about, you can actually get very reproducibly precise structures out of that. And then the other important thing is to be able to adjust the focus by changing the distance between the lens and whatever sample you have. And one way we do with the Foldscope is to have the lens attached to a piece of paper that flexes. And so you can use your thumbs to actually stretch or pull this piece of paper with the lens, and that's how you can focus.
Well, that's really amazing. I think a design like yours would work really well for my project.
Awesome. Yeah, well, if you'd like, we can send you a sample of the Foldscope if you'd like to use that as a template.
Yeah, that'd be really great. Thanks for your help again.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure. Good luck with everything.
Thanks to Max's advice, I now have an idea of what I need to do to make my microscope. But first, I need to overcome the problems I had last time when I made my glass from scratch, which resulted in less than clear glass. The key 3 ingredients I used for glass last time were sand, limestone, and potash. One of the issues with my first attempt at glass was the likely impurities of my ingredients. Pure potash is a white powder, but the stuff I had last time was more gray-green in color. So I needed to give this a second try. Once again, I used hardwood ashes to extract the potash from. However, rather than burning a ton of wood this time, just for the ashes, I worked with a nearby restaurant, Doolittle's Wood Fire Grill, who was able to provide me with a large supply of their leftover ashes. Same as last time, I'll soak the ashes in water and evaporate the potash from the water solution. However, this time, to reduce any chance of other stray chemicals that might get concentrated from the tap water, I used only distilled water. Once soaked, I used a strainer to remove the charcoal and other trash that floated on the surface.
That's not charcoal.
Then I let the sediment settle to the bottom and poured the remaining liquid into a pot through a cloth to strain out any remaining charcoal or other debris. Then over the course of several hours, I boiled the liquid down. Unlike last time, I let the solution sit overnight again and separate once more. On the surface was a nearly completely clear liquid that I then slowly evaporated and crystallized. Then grinding up this final result, I had a much more promising batch of potash ready. Another impurity that affected my last batch of glass was trace amounts of iron in the sand that I collected. This resulted in a bluish tint to my glass. This time, I tried using a strong magnet to extract any trace iron. After several passes through, I was able to extract a surprisingly decent amount of magnetic debris, which I think I'll save for a future project. Now knowing that you can extract iron this way, it's very likely you'll be seeing this again in a future episode. Instead of using limestone this time, I thought I'd try a different source of the same chemical, eggs. I've collected a variety of different eggs so far in my quests, and all bird eggs are at least the 95% calcium carbonate that I'm after, so I thought I'd give this source a try. With new, more pure sources for all of my ingredients, it's time to melt them into glass. Previously, I was able to work with a glass blower, Michael. Unfortunately, his schedule was too packed to let us use his kiln again, and no other glass blower that we reached out to was willing to let us use theirs. So we were forced to go a little lower tech, and Michael lent us the equipment to build our own makeshift kiln. Using a bunch of ceramic bricks and a propane torch, we were able to get something that should hopefully work. After waiting a few hours for the kiln to get to the right temperature, I mixed together the 3 ingredients and added it to the kiln. After a while, the glass started to melt and turn into a thick liquid. One thing we noted from my first attempt was that the glass lower in the crucible was actually a lot clearer than the top portion that we poured from. We suspected this was because the potash sunk to the bottom. To counteract this, we made sure to mix the glass periodically. With all the improvements to my ingredients and knowing to mix it now, I was feeling pretty optimistic about this attempt. After going for over 10 hours and getting late into the night, it looked like we were getting pretty close. I attempted to pull a strand of glass to make the lens from, which I then let cool overnight before the next step. The next step to actually making my microscope lens is to pull a thin strand of glass and then melt it into a bead. To practice, I used some glass rods. Heating them to their melting point under a propane torch, I pulled them until they are super thin and then broke off one end. Then I heated that end until it started to form a bead. The surface tension of the glass helps it to form into a sphere, and then once it's reached the desired size, I remove it from the flame and snap it off.
You lose it?
I have to be careful though, because if it goes flying, there's no way I'll be able to find it. After several attempts and a few different sized lenses, I gave the glass that I actually made a shot. With a few different options for lenses, now I just need to make the body of the microscope. Thanks to Foldscope, I know the paper can make a great body, which I just happened to have already made when I previously attempted to make a book from scratch. To make this cotton paper, I traveled to a cotton farm in Texas where I handpicked my own cotton. Then I used a gin to remove the seeds from the rest of the fiber. The fiber was then ran through a beater machine to break it up into smaller bits. Then it was placed into a tub of water and a mold is pulled through it, forming the sheet of paper. Lastly, it's pressed in a vise and then hung to dry. Thanks to the example Foldscope sent me, I'm able to use it as a pattern to make mine. Now, I just need to put everything together.
I can try it with my actual glass. So yeah, that's completely opaque. So in the end, this attempt at making glass was not any more successful than my last, unfortunately. The biggest culprit I suspect for this one was the kiln itself. I think if we could have baked it hotter and for longer, we would have gotten much better result. However, now it's developed a yellow tint, which I'm not sure why this happened, but there's a chance it might be from trace amounts of sulfur in the eggshells, which can cause a yellow tint to glass. So despite all of this, I still haven't managed to make good glass for optics. However, with the glass rods, I was actually able to make pretty good lenses. Hey, it actually works pretty good. I can definitely see that paramecium. Wow, that worked a lot better than I thought it would. I can actually see the paramecium in the slide, which the paramecium is the original microorganism that Van Leeuwenhoek actually discovered and was able to create the theory of microorganisms from.
So while the glass was yet another failure, I did manage to make an actual working microscope. And that itself, I think, is a pretty cool fact that I was able to make something that I can see a whole invisible world with. Frustratingly, this result was not really any better. I think the main cause of this was not having access to the glassmaker's furnace to run at a full temperature and as long as possible. The crude kiln we ran just couldn't melt things down enough to burn off all the impurities. A large part of making glass is being able to heat and cook it, as a lot of impurities and bubbles can either be burned off or worked out if you can bake it long enough. But after my first attempt, I wasn't really able to get access to a glassblower's furnace to throw our experiments into again, which caused some setbacks. But with some interesting comments on the first video, we made an additional attempt with some of the same ingredients. I received a lot of interesting suggestions for improving my attempt at making clear glass, so I wanted to give it one more try. To purify my potash more, I recrystallized it a few more times, separating the impurities even more. There were a lot of interesting suggestions on purifying the eggshells, but ultimately, I figured the easiest solution was to just omit the lime altogether. But if you can just omit it, why is lime even included in the first place? Lime acts as a stabilizer that makes the glass stronger and water resistant. Without it, the glass will eventually dissolve. So I can make fine glass without it, but it won't necessarily last that long. For the sand itself, removing the iron seemed to work pretty well last time. The sample I checked under the microscope that I made previously showed what looked like pretty pure amounts of clear quartz. Just in case, I baked the sand in the kiln first to burn off any possible impurities. Then we mixed the two ingredients and baked it in the kiln. After baking for most of the day, the result was looking pretty promising. We poured it out as best as possible. And then placed it into the kiln and sealed it up so it would slowly cool overnight. So this is the final result of this attempt. As you can see, it's actually pretty good, and probably the closest I've gotten so far at making actual clear glass. Here are all my other attempts. From my very first one with unpurified potash, barely resembles glass itself, the glass I used to make my eyeglasses, my microscope, and this latest attempt. Despite great improvements, I still don't think it's quite clear enough for a glass lens. So at this point, I think I've reached a limit of what I can achieve with the ingredients that are available to me. To succeed past this point, I think I need extra chemicals that are often added to help reduce the bubbles. But these chemicals aren't something I can easily source near me. Another option is to switch to soda ash in the place of potash. When Louis Darnell made his attempt, he used this chemical and had a much clearer result. But likewise, a source for soda ash isn't available anywhere near me. So for the time being, I'm going to put a pin on making glass from scratch until later I can hopefully afford trips to get these chemicals. Possibly even later this year. It was after this I set my eye on different ingredients for the flux. Later on, at the Corning Museum of Glass, I would learn about the historical place potash holds for glass making. For most places in most of history, soda ash was the primary flux used for glass making. But the infamous Venetian glassblowers held a monopoly on soda ash in the Middle Ages. So in Northern Europe, they found a local source to use instead, potash, producing a unique form of glass called forest glass. Likewise, to me, they struggled to make clear glass, oftentimes turning out green or blue in tint. But soda ash was the preferred flux for many reasons, and I set my mind next to traveling to somewhere where I could source it. Fortunately, around the same time, I reached out to a major YouTuber, the King of Random, who graciously was open to doing a collaboration.
This gave me a destination to travel to, and an excuse to collect as many minerals and resources as I could on the way. Most importantly, being soda ash. In the early days of starting my YouTube channel, this expensive road trip was a major gamble, but with such a huge YouTuber as Grant, the payoff ended up entirely worth it. A lot of my success today is thanks to Grant being willing to work with a small upcoming channel like my own, which made his passing a few years later in an accident all the more painful. But his impact remains alive in my life as well as countless others I know he's influenced and helped.
Glass is a material we find all around us in the modern world. Its clear transparency has made it an incredibly useful tool by allowing us to see in and out of various objects. It even allows us to modify our vision to correct and improve our sight, or to extend our vision to see incredibly tiny or distant objects. But what if you couldn't just buy glass? What if the infrastructure that exists to allow you to buy it from a store disappeared one day? How hard would it be to collect the resources from nature and make your own glass? The answer I found is that it's actually pretty hard. I've tried 3 separate times now, each time adjusting my methods and ingredients, but still making actual transparent glass has remained out of my reach. But I'm not yet ready to admit defeat. Ultimately, there are 3 things holding me back from success: my lack of access to additional minerals, my own lack of knowledge on some of the chemistry required, and my lack of proper equipment to reach high enough temperatures. So I reached out to 2 other YouTubers who I saw were also experimenting with glassmaking, and realized between what each of us brought to the table, we might just be able to make this happen. But to get to them and collect all the additional ingredients I'll need, I'm gonna have to hit the road and head west to collect minerals for the glass from 4 different states. Before I leave home in Minnesota, I want to make sure I bring some of the sand I collected from the Mississippi River with me. The quartz sand in this area, combined with the hydroelectric power of the river, once made this area a key location for producing glass for windshields of thousands of cars that were once produced here in the early 20th century. My previous attempts at glass proved the quality of the sand, although there are trace iron impurities, which has caused some of bluish-green discoloration, but I'll be receiving some help from Cody to try and remove that later. The next key ingredient for glass making is the flux. This is an ingredient that lowers the melting point of glass and makes it much easier to work with. While glass can be made without it, it often requires intense heat of lightning, volcano, or nuclear bombs, and usually it doesn't turn out that clear. In my previous attempt, I was forced to use a locally available mineral called potash. Extracted from hardwood ashes, this mineral proved to be a pain to collect, requiring the processing of tons of ashes. However, most glass today uses a different material for the flux, soda ash. However, it's not available anywhere in Minnesota, so my next stop is going to have to be Wyoming, near an old historic landmark. If you followed along the old Oregon Trail, you would come across a large round monolith that was named Independence Rock. For settlers making it out west, this rock marked the location you wanted to arrive by July 4th, Independence Day. If you were to arrive later than that, it's likely you wouldn't be able to make it through the mountains before the winter snow came and blocked all the mountain passes. Carved all along the rock are the names of some of these travelers. But my interest isn't in the rock, but a nearby lake which contains a compound called natron. It's been used in glassmaking since ancient Roman times. I'm here in Natrona County, Wyoming, to collect what is the namesake of this county, natron. In this lake is a high deposit of a variety of chemicals that make up natron, the chief one being soda ash, which can be used for glassmaking and soap. So I'm going to collect some of the brine, boil it down, and hopefully Cody will be able to help me separate the chemicals so we can get some really good glass. It is disgusting here. There's like swarms of flies over there. Just smells disgusting. I'm not sure where it is. I don't know if it's the actual chemicals. I mean, the water looks disgusting. It's super cloudy. It's probably the high concentration of the chemicals, but there might be other stuff in here too. Hopefully not. I'm trying to get pure stuff. With the natron collected, I strain out all the bug larvae and other particles, and then boil it down to just the salts. With the aftermath of that, I might be banned from a few hotels. Then it's on to the next stop of our trip, Arizona. One suggestion Cody gave me was that I needed to add fining agents that will help reduce and remove the air bubbles that have plagued my past attempts. Many of these compounds were too difficult to source from nature, but one option I could get was gypsum. Gypsum is a compound that's often used in drywall, but also can be added to glass to help remove air bubbles. It's hard. Right next to the Utah border in Arizona, I was able to access an old gypsum mine and collect some raw crystals myself. With that collection of minerals, it was off to one more stop at the fourth state to visit Cody in Utah. There with him, he'll help me with the last couple ingredients and also help me purify all the other minerals. But first, while in Utah, I collected a bunch of other ingredients I can use in future projects, including gold, silver, obsidian, several other minerals, and also stopped to blow some stuff up. But now, on to Cody. One of the last crucial ingredients I need for my glass is lime. Adding a small amount of this calcium carbonate compound prevents the glass from degrading when exposed to moisture. In my previous attempts, I tried crushed limestone and even eggshells, but both had other impurities that ended up discoloring the glass. Cody helped me find a much more pure source of straight calcium carbonate, a mineral called calcite. First up for purifying my ingredients, removing the iron from my sand.
It looks like most of the lithic fragments in here are actually sandstone, so a lot of the darker bits are pitch blende though, basically dirt forming minerals. It looks like a pretty good sand, really.
Yeah.
It's nice and fine. Looks like there's some bits of carbonate. I don't think I'll be able to take out these lithic fragments. One thing I can take out is the heavy iron materials. Magnetite's pretty easy to get out with a magnet, but hematite is not really all that magnetic.
Oh, really?
So it's kind of harder to remove. But doing this, it's heavy, so it'll sink to the bottom. You guys gold pan before, right?
Yeah, just a few days ago.
Look at that. Here's your black sand. It's not a lot we took out, but that would really help.
Next, we need to separate the soda ash from the rest of the impurities in the natron. According to a 50-year-old geological study, 35% sodium sulfate, and then the rest of it is mostly soda ash.
Tastes like soda ash, so I believe it. How much brine did you have?
10 gallons?
That must have been concentrated. The major contaminant you said is sodium sulfate?
Yep.
Okay. So I do have a few ways we can remove that.
Cody showed me how he roasted his calcite to form calcium oxide, which when then added to water forms a strong base of calcium hydroxide.
The calcium hydroxide will react with sodium sulfate, forming calcium sulfate, which is even less soluble than the calcium hydroxide. Calcium sulfate will settle down along with most of the calcium hydroxide, and what we'll end up with is sodium carbonate mixed with the sodium hydroxide. Sodium hydroxide, probably as you're boiling it down, will react with carbon in the air, forming more sodium carbonate. So it's one way to get rid of that contaminant. Yeah, you gotta boil that down again.
Lastly, Cody produced another fining agent to add to the mix, nitric acid, which acts like a bleach and removes any extra color and contaminants that might have been left in my other ingredients. For more details on how Cody produced his nitric acid, roasted the lime, and further explanations of everything he did, be sure to check out the video on his channel. Thanks to Cody, all the ingredients should now be ready for the glass making and final collaboration with our last stop with Grant Thompson, King of Random.
Thanks to his help and Cody's, it seemed we were closer than ever to achieving this final goal, making some of the clearest glass yet. But it still wasn't as good as the result as I had hoped. Next steps were recreating Grant's foundry and experimenting with that. In the end, however, I ended up going a different direction after seeing some of the tools Cody was working with, namely an affordable electric kiln. Electric kilns opened the door for much quicker testing, but also more controlled experiments. I even ended up going down a tangent of exploring melting obsidian, something we had gathered on our way to collaborate with Grant. These experiments revealed one of the challenges of glass making. Molten glass will eat through nearly everything and quickly break a kiln if it's not contained. Obsidian being especially dangerous because of its tendency to foam up. These expensive lessons ended up paying off, with that video going massively viral for reasons I still don't really understand, and unfortunately haven't really been able to replicate since. But this opened the door to having an actual budget for some of our projects. Some point after this, a fan pointed me towards a video by Applied Science, where he was experimenting with making light reactive glass. In it, he makes a mention of how effective a flux the addition of boric acid is. Using these quick heating kilns, I was able to do some test batches and find that this chemical was going to be a game changer. Next is figuring out how to get this compound from its natural source, which took me to California and paved a new path forward.
One material that's been elusive to me despite numerous attempts has been clear glass. In the past, I've documented 5 previous attempts at producing it, even going as far as to travel out west for extra ingredients and help from other YouTubers. Each attempt got me closer and closer, but still nothing completely clear that would work for optics. Over in the background, it only took me another 15 attempts to finally figure out the missing ingredients and techniques to finally pull this off. All it took was learning how to make soap, learning how to make toothpaste, and making one more journey out west to collect the compound I was initially only interested in as a laundry detergent. First, the secret ingredient I needed as a flux that made optically clear glass much more achievable: borax. This flux was completely off my radar, as borosilicate glass is known for its heat resistance and for melting at a higher temperature, so the idea of adding it to my glass mixture to lower the melting point didn't even cross my mind. But in the end, this compound ended up being crucial. So to collect it from its natural source, I took a trip to the borax capital of the world, Boron, California.
I'm here at the borax mine in Boron. Behind me is where they harvest it. It's an old lake bed, I believe. It is incredibly windy here, if you can't tell. They extract it out, bring it up, and then they sell it and use it in many industrial purposes. On the side here at the visitor center, they have a pit of some of the leftovers. They let some of the visitors come and help themselves. So that's what I'm gonna do, because for some reason, they won't let me down there. So that's how I'm gonna get my borax. I'm gonna grab a bucket. All right, so now I should have a variety of different boron containing elements I'm gonna make a few different items from. A little too big.
To learn a little bit more about this rock itself, while in Boron, I visited the rock expert David Eyre.
Wake up next to a wonderful wife, drive a bunch of bitchin' cars, and I play with rocks. Can you ask for a better job than that?
We're in the town of Boron right now, and these are several different minerals that contain boron, right?
Yeah, these are borates, and these particular are sodium borates. This is borax, the native borax, and it actually has sort of a wet feeling because it's 10 molecules of water. And when it dehydrates to being white, that most people recognize it being, that's actually the mineral tincalconite, which is 5 molecules of water. This is also borax. If you were to break off that edge, and you can still see here that it is translucent, this is what they refer to as red ore. This actually has high amounts of arsenic in it. One of the other sodium borates is kernite, named after Kern County, the county that we're in. It was first identified here in Boron. Kernite is now principally used for making boric acid, and this is actually what a kernite crystal looks like. These are pretty rare.
So like when you buy a box of borax soap, is it basically this?
Yeah, it'll be basically more of your pentahydrate than so much your decahydrate. Reason why boron compounds work good in soap products is it does 2 things. It actually does lower the surface tension of the water, which means the water makes the clothes a little wetter because that surface tension is lower. And it also acts as a mild hydrogen peroxide. So yeah, you're actually getting a peroxide bleaching that took place from the borax.
Is borax mostly used in laundry detergent?
Oh no, that's actually a very small part. It's 10-12% of the market's actually for laundry purposes. Majority of it is industrial applications, everything from computer chips to fiberglass. Boron compounds are actually used in everything from birth to death. You will find it in the glass in your house, the glass in your car. You'll actually find it in the fuel in your gas tank, because boron compounds will control the microbes that occur in your fuel. It's in your clothes, other than just washing. The space shuttle tiles, those were borosilicate. They were great at heat dissipation. Yeah, even in your plasma screen TV and your cell phone, yeah, boron compounds. The benefits of borosilicate glass is it can actually take exceptionally high temperatures. A lot of people are familiar with Pyrex or the Pyrex brand.
Yeah.
If you have Pyrex dishes that was produced during 1960s, 1970s, boron compounds that was used in that actually all came from Death Valley.
So is there any reason why this area has so much boron compounds?
Well, this location, that actually was a lake at one time that was spring fed from the north. Where the boron compounds came from to feed into that spring, yep, that would be a nice thing to know too, wouldn't it? This deposit is rather old. The bottom of the pit is around 35 million. Some people would call that old. Of course, the business I'm in, that's actually not overly old. Yeah. We've been mining here since 1927. Hence the town Boron, named after symbol B, number 5 on the elemental chart. And we are the borax capital of the world, at least as of right now.
Well, borax should hopefully help me make clear glass. David also collects a specific variety of this boron compound that has an oddity of not being transparent, but instead by acting more like fiber optics.
This is a boron compound also, and the mineral name is ulexite. It's a sodium calcium borate. As far as ulexite goes, ulexite occurs throughout the rest of the world. The optical grade, which is what this is, only occurs in boron. Okay, you're not looking through the rock. It's projecting the image to the surface of the rock. This is ulexite from boron is a natural occurring fiber optic mineral. Only here in boron do we have the optical grade variety of ulexite. Ulexite from boron is the material that Bell Telephone experimented with back in the late 50s for the fiber optics we have today. Many industries experimented with the ulexite for its fiber optic properties. NASA experimented with it. I supplied them with that material.
So the reason it has that property is because of how the molecules crystallize?
That's a good question right there. They cannot reproduce ulexite to do this. This is an anomaly. Borax Company tried to regrow ulexite in the lab. They were able to regrow it, but they could not get it to have its crystal habit realign. They don't know why.
Now back home, with a supply of borax, let's go through why this compound is so important and why all of my previous attempts have failed. First off, let's lay out 2 unique challenges I face sourcing all of the raw ingredients and heating it to the adequate melting temperature. A glassmaker today will just use a pre-mixed powder for producing a clear and easy to work with glass. But with the unique rules that I attempt to follow in my series, I can't just buy the ingredients to make glass. I need to source them from nature, which is something that's become a bit of a lost art. So piecing together the best recipes and the sources of these ingredients and how to remove any impurities from them has always been a challenge. Then there's the method of heating it. Forming glass requires some pretty intense heat. At a temperature range that requires some special and expensive equipment to reach it. A gas furnace in a glass blowing studio can cost anywhere from 8 to 20 grand, if not more. Something a bit out of range for a YouTuber who only dabbles in glass making. For some of my first attempts, I was able to get access to one of these furnaces, which can reach temperatures up to 2300 degrees Fahrenheit. However, running these gas-powered furnaces is pretty expensive, and getting continued access to them quickly became pretty impossible. After that, I tried a series of different kiln setups, including a recreation of Grant's Forge. But without an easy way to regulate and control the temperature, these methods were not ideal for making glass. Then, there's the issue that glass tends to require some really long bake times, and it's not too safe to leave something like that running with an open flame. Fortunately, it was around this time that our channel had picked up a little traction, and I could invest a little more money into some small electric kilns. And this is where I could really start narrowing down the science behind this. With the gas setup, it would take a long time to heat up and I'd have to basically babysit it, so I didn't risk burning down the garage. But the kiln, I could reach high temperatures in as quick as 10 minutes, and didn't need to be run outside under constant supervision, so I could do a lot of fairly quick tests. With all these kilns and forges, getting to that peak temperature of at least 2300 degrees Fahrenheit was a challenge, and these electric kilns still fall just a little short. This lower working temperature is where a large challenge comes in, and what leads to the next topic, and where the borax becomes so crucial, the flux. A flux is any compound added to a glass mix that will lower the melting temperature and make it more malleable so it's possible to work with it. The first flux I tried to use is potassium carbonate, or potash, which can be extracted from the ashes of hardwood trees. So after much work, I extracted the compound by soaking tons of ashes in water, draining and boiling off the final solution to yield a gray final compound. That, however, did not yield the best glass. So I tried again, and still no luck. Potash can be used to make glass, but most often the preferred compound is sodium carbonate, so I figured I could source this and see if I have better luck. So I took a trip to the closest natural source of it to me, Wyoming. This seemed to work better, but it still was falling short. With the easy-to-use electric kilns, I ran multiple tests, using both my naturally sourced compounds and chemically pure purchased ones, and learned while the soda ash was able to get me a lot closer, completely clear, bubble-free glass wasn't possible with just these compounds, no matter how long I was able to bake it for. Only when I added the borax did things finally turn out clear. Looking at the melting points of potash, soda ash, and borax, you can start to see why. By using borax, the overall melting point of my glass mixture goes down even further, allowing it to turn more fluid at the slightly lower temperature and all the bubbles to more easily separate. So now, knowing a workable recipe for success, I just need to prepare all of my compounds and see if I can actually pull this off. So when I first tried to make glass, I thought you just needed sand. But it actually involves hundreds of different compounds. So next I learned about fluxes and other compounds like lime that help stabilize it. I kind of just threw in all the compounds without purifying them, and that ended up with pretty opaque results. The thing I learned is that in order to make clear glass, you first gotta learn how to make soap, you gotta learn how to make toothpaste, and you gotta learn how to make laundry detergent. So in making those other items, I learned how to process these other compounds into their pure elements. And these come from all around the country. I got the sand and limestone from here in Minnesota. I got the soda ash from a lake in Wyoming. I got salt from a salt mine in Utah. Chips and crystals are from Arizona. And the borax is from California. A little bit of all over from the US. And the sand, when I did the toothpaste, I actually did a bunch extra, so I have some leftover silicon dioxide, which is just like straight quartz, no impurities. You can tell there's a huge difference in color. So that right there itself is a pretty good sign. So with these 6 compounds, I can hopefully finally make clear glass. All right, so let's start purifying some chemicals. First, I took the limestone and baked it at over 1600 degrees Fahrenheit. Turning the calcium carbonate inside of it into calcium oxide, which is water soluble and forms a very caustic calcium hydroxide. And we are very basic. Get some pumpkin spice latte. All the impurities in the stone should precipitate out as solids and can be strained out. I can then react my soda ash with the calcium hydroxide to form a dissolved lye. Some impurities from the soda ash should stay solid and can also be strained out. Now, both the calcium hydroxide and lye will slowly react with CO2 in the air and turn back into the calcium carbonate and soda ash that I'm after. To speed it up, I'll bubble a bit of CO2, which will reduce both of them to their less caustic version. The rest of the compounds I crushed and dissolved into water. Then strained them to remove any solid impurities and left them to dry. Once dried, I measured them out and combined them into a ball mill to evenly mix and pulverize them. Now to melt it into glass. Just let it run overnight. Hopefully have some clear glass. From here, it took several attempts, experimenting to find an ideal setup to pour it onto to form a nice puck. I don't think that was steel. That's aluminum. Yet still, there was one last major hurdle I had to overcome. Annealing it. On its own, glass will cool unevenly from the surface in, which can cause tension to form within it and eventually cause it to shatter. So to solve that, you have to slowly cool it over several hours and up to days. The exact rate depends on the thickness of your glass and its composition. Since I made my glass myself, this was a guessing game. And attempt after attempt, it kept cracking on me. The good news is, I can throw the glass back into the crucible and remelt it again, and each time I did this, it seemed to get clearer with more and more bubbles removed, till I finally had a very clear, solid piece to work with. Okay, took like 15 to 20 tries, but I finally have some clear glass. Well, actually, it broke in half. Where did I put that other piece? Rushed a little bit trying to flip it because it was starting to slump and ended up cracking in half, but both halves are actually clear glass. Took like 15 to 20 tries, but finally have it. It's got a slight discoloration, slight greenness to it. So there might still be some impurities or might be caused by the borax, I'm not sure, but this is definitely clear glass. I feel pretty confident I can actually make some lenses out of this. Finally got it. Now with both optical grade glass and a metal produced from scratch, I can move forward on my camera project and make a camera lens next. Borax as a flux really opened the door for clear glass and was able to achieve my main goal of making a camera lens from scratch. In many ways though, borax is kind of a cheat code. It's a way to achieve clear glass at a lower temperature and shorter time frame, which is ideal if you're limited to cheap electric kilns, which top out at around 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. Also, the quantity of borax in the mix left a very liquid glass, which ended up being perfect for casting glass as I needed for my lenses, but not really workable for actual glass blowing, which limits its actual use. So for my very specific needs, I achieved an answer, but for broader use, several questions still remained. How was glassmaking achieved historically when the use of borax is only a modern addition? And how do I best achieve glassmaking and glass blowing ability for all my future project needs? After this last video, I ended up being able to make it out to visit Lewis Darnell in person in London. While there, he proposed a bunch of new ideas for me, including building a steam engine.
I would love to see a steam engine that you've built from scratch.
This ended up planting a seed in my mind that slowly grew by the time I got back home, of restructuring how the channel explored the world. Before, it was just focused on the origin of the materials and products. Now, I wanted to focus on the origin of the tools themselves. Specifically, the evolution of tool technology starting from the Stone Age to the Steam Age. Somehow I've managed to find a way to expand a channel about everything to be yet even broader. With the broader new goals, copper and iron were major milestones I aimed for, which required the use of charcoal and bellows to achieve temperatures very similar to glass blowing. So lacking much information on ancient glassmaking, I resorted to piggybacking off of these early attempts to see if they would also work for glass, which I would later learn was actually kind of a misdirection.
In the ongoing quest to rebuild ourselves through history, we just recently began to cross over the threshold into the Iron Age. Iron is a challenging metal to master its formation and forging into useful tools. But there's another material with an older origin than iron that's proven to be the long arcing challenge for me for nearly the entire journey of this channel so far: glass. 2 years ago, after several trips outsourcing raw ingredients and lots of experimentation, I finally figured out the secrets for making clear glass from scratch. This was mostly a challenge of finding the right techniques and modern tools to use, combined with sourcing the most effective chemical ingredients. But it was still dependent on an electric kiln, modern installation, and other tools of today. But now, with my reset and the change of the scope of the channel, the challenge begins anew, needing to figure out and replicate how this difficult material was first discovered and mastered. So let's start this journey all over again. With early evidence dating its discovery at nearly 5,000 years ago, glass has a long history. My earlier challenges with the material have been mostly about producing optically clear glass, but that was a much later development. Early forms of glass started out much more opaque and cloudy. This type of material is going to be our first milestone. The origins of glass are likely in relation to its accidental discovery, either from ceramics or metalworking. Some early forms of glazes are very similar to glass making and effectively produce a layer of glass on the outside of ceramics, which could have easily evolved into being used alone to make glass. Glass is often also a byproduct of metal production, where impurities in the ore, like sand, can often be turned into a glassy slag. There are, in general, two main components to glass: silica sand and a flux. The flux reduces the melting temperature of the glass and makes the sand easier to melt and work with. Sand is relatively easy to procure, but the flux can be a bit difficult. For an historical flux, we paid a visit to the Gulf of Mexico while in the area and looked for a plant that often served this role.
Off the coast of the Gulf of Mexico in Texas, and we're on some of the salt marshes here, and we're looking for a plant called the glasswort or saltwort. It's a plant that grows near saltwater, and you can burn it. The ashes will produce sodium carbonate, which we use as a flux for making glass. Kind of the way it was originally done before more modern processes were discovered. So see here, it's low tide right now. Water's receded, so most likely along this edge here where its roots are getting saturated at high tide. Nice stick. I make a nice aloe. Some laundry detergent.
This might be it. It looks at least very similar. There's a lot of varieties of saltwort that can be used.
Should we be worried about snakes?
Probably. That's what the sign said. It's gators and venomous snakes. So probably don't do what we're doing. See any gators over there? All right, so I'm relatively sure we have some of the saltwort right here. It's a plant that looks very similar to it, possibly the same, I'm not sure. It has flatter leaves, has a berry. Let's just blindly eat this and see if it kills us. It might be something else, but it also would be growing in the same environment, so it'd probably work. So this guy right here, I'm pretty sure is glasswort, or at least the, prickly. The local variety of glasswort, which is also known as, I believe, redwort, or red glasswort, because it turns red. Burning these should be usable for making the soda ash for glass.
So this is the glasswort that Andy collected in Texas. We're looking for soda ash. We've already burned it, but after burning it, we soak it in water, strain it, and then boil it, and what's left is the soda ash. Ooh, witchcraft. Ooh.
Once the water is boiled off, a relatively pure sample of soda ash should remain, which can be used in the glass as the flux. Another very useful flux that ended up being a major key for making clear glass in my previous journey is borax, a natural compound we were able to collect in California. Borax has an even lower melting point, which makes the production of glass even easier. While historically borax was available, its use in glass came a lot later. So for my first attempts, I'm going to be using this later knowledge to my advantage, and then attempt to make a more historically accurate version of glass after I first succeed with borax. In my previous experiments, I found a roughly 1:1:1 ratio of these three ingredients tended to produce the best results. With my glass ingredients ready to melt, the next challenge is getting the right temperature, ideally around 2000 to 2400 degrees Fahrenheit. Having just constructed a cob bloomery in our first iron smelting attempt, which happens to operate at roughly the same temperature range, I attempted to repurpose the bloomery and see if we could turn it into a kiln, hopefully able to melt our glass.
right, so after doing the iron smelt, we were able to salvage the bloomery and we kind of rebuilt it as more of a kiln. So we have a little chamber here with a shelf, opens right up to the coals. Got a crucible here. We have our sand and soda ash mix. I'm gonna just put that in there and put it in proximity because we don't want the actual ash to get inside, otherwise it'll probably discolor our glass and make it mostly black. Don't need to go quite as hot as steel, but pretty close. I think 2100 degrees Fahrenheit is probably ideal to get everything melted. Glass making in ancient times was usually a two-step process. First to make the glass and then to actually turn the glass into something. So we're just gonna do the first step right now, and that's to make an actual glass. Start hitting it with the bellows. All right, we've been running for a while. Check on inside. It is, I think it's fused with, we have partially formed glass. Crucible's pretty much half gone, disintegrated, so that's not great. We got one more big crucible. We'll try it again, put it on the top. And if we heat it slow enough, it won't get directly heated by the coal. I just want the coal directly on it. It's too hot. So if we slowly heat our way up from the top, maybe we'll get something that is not a complete failure. At worst case scenario, maybe we'll get some glass we can pick out at the bottom. Take the bottom of the previous one and just kind of shove that in. It's kind of a lid to stop too much ash from getting in there. Light it up and give it another shot. Hopefully it doesn't flip over. Okay. Maybe. Partially formed glass, and seems like mostly succeeded at making more of a glaze, which was the precursor to glass. So almost. It's a shiny turd. Glass, but mixed with a lot of impurities. It's close, but not quite there.
The failure of the first attempt seemed to primarily be because of the very direct and uneven heating that was hitting the crucibles, causing them to crack and break on the exposed side, while not reaching the high temperature on the other side. So for the next design, I want to try getting the crucible directly over the heat with some amount of separation, hopefully producing a much better result. Similar to this depiction I found of a cupola style kiln, with the crucible sitting on a grate directly above the heat source. I'm not sure why they put fish in there. Unfortunately, the bloomery was unsalvageable after the second firing, so I needed to start over again, and decided to invent a new building material that'll be a little bit more reusable. Bricks. So using a ceramic brick mold, Lauren formed 120 bricks out of clay. Ground-fired pottery, called grog, is applied to the outside of the bricks to help prevent any cracking. Then left them to dry for 5 days.
I made all these bricks, but they're a bit wonky, so I'm gonna use the knife and shape them down, kind of take the rougher edges off so that when we stack them to make the kiln, it has more of a tighter seal.
Now to fire them and build the kiln. I built a small fire and then surrounded it with all the unfired bricks. Then slowly built up the fire to be hotter and hotter. Until finally sealing it up and letting it burn down overnight. In the morning, while suffering a few casualties, resulted with bricks that are fired on the one side. Now to take down the pile and build the kiln, making sure to put the already fired face of the bricks on the outside. Using a mixture of sand and clay as a mortar, I slowly built the kiln up taller and taller. For the shelf grate, we actually had a circular shelf Annalise had made earlier for our bronze smelt in the draft kiln, that we had ultimately decided not to use, and now could finally be put to use. I built the kiln with a lower chamber for the fire and heat source, with an opening to add more fuel and feed it forced air, and an upper portion to hold the crucibles. Now to build a small fire to finish firing off the inside portion of the bricks, once again sealing it off to burn down overnight. With everything now set and ready to begin the actual glass melt, I once again started a small fire in the kiln, loaded up the crucibles, and slowly built up the fire and the heat.
Inside the chamber, it's just below 500 degrees. Really good time to start putting it in our crucibles and getting them warming up. Big one. Uh-oh. There we go. Alright, so I had the kiln all built and warmed up, fired it a few times, see if the brick mostly fired as much as I could. Now loaded it up with a couple of crucibles. Just have just a wood fire going right now. We have 2 crucibles warming up. It's about 500 degrees up here. And eventually, as it slowly gradually warms up, we'll seal it up, get it a little bit hotter, and then we'll switch to charcoal and forced air, and that'll get it up to our final melting temperature, around 2000 degrees, a little bit over. Biggest challenge is gonna be the crucibles not cracking this time. The whole structure not collapsing, I guess. It's got a few cracks in it. It's not perfectly sealed, unfortunately. Could use another layer of mortar or whatever, but we're gonna give it a shot and see how well it turns out. Hopefully we can get a sizable portion of glass this time inside one of the crucibles. So I completed the second kiln made out of bricks and ran into a few issues with it. It's definitely going to be a work in progress and getting the perfect kiln, and hopefully now that we have bricks we can make it a little bit more reusable. As I did it, I realized I had a few design flaws that I hadn't forethought. Should have had like another hole higher up where I could have fed it additional charcoal as it started to run out, and possibly some sort of closable doors. I think having some actual tuyères would have really helped. Potentially having multiple ones coming from different directions to all feed the charcoal all at once so you get maximum airflow. Ended up having the hole in the back kind of start to form, so I just kind of pushed it open to add more charcoal into it so I could fill it better, and some firewood, and that seemed to definitely help in getting the temperature higher, but it also created just a huge hole where all the heat and flames escape from, so it kind of decreased the efficiency of it, unfortunately. Looks pretty cool, giant flames shooting out of it, but not the most efficient. The challenge with this is definitely getting a hot enough heat to actually melt the glass, but not too hot or too quickly too hot, where it would crack the crucibles and lose everything. With the bloomery, the challenge was it got too hot too quick and kind of just destroyed the actual crucible, and our result kind of just coated everything else. Didn't get a great result. So this one we succeeded in maintaining the crucibles and not having them break and contain their contents, but just looking on the outside I can tell that they didn't fully melt, but there's definitely some formation of glass starting in some of it. Reminder, this is early forms of glass. It's not going to be transparent. It's going to be very cloudy. It's going to have coloration to it. It's kind of just the very first forms of glass. Optically clear glass came a lot later. So let's dump these out, check them out, and see how they turned out. We have some glass starting to form along the edges and at the bottom here. Here's a piece of glass. Okay. With a little guy that clearly was able to get to a little bit higher temperature, and obviously a lot more of it kind of melted together. A lot more glass-like substance at the bottom. Hard to get out, but see if we can get this very cloudy chunk of glass here. Still has a bit of flux in it to be kind of ideal, but this might be usable to actually start like glass working on. So I think this could be considered a success. So that is most definitely glass. Lauren, what are you doing?
I'm just taking pictures for our Instagram because we have an Instagram and you should follow us on Instagram.
Oh yeah, you guys should check that out.
Instagram.
Instagram. One of the big roadblocks for this has been that we just don't really have a permanent space to do anything, so everything we make kind of ends up getting destroyed in the end. But now with the bricks and some new developments, should have a more permanent place where I can kind of just slowly improve it without having to go back to scratch with each one. So hopefully we can get some better long-term goals along the way.
Having just barely reached the temperatures to make glass, I'll next need to improve my setup to produce a higher and more controlled heat, and then move on to making the tools needed for actually working and making something out of the glass. Today we're going to see how hot we can get things. In many ways, the history of humanity can be summarized as humans learning how to make fire hotter and hotter. This has been a constant challenge and journey as we work our way through time, unlocking ceramics and metals as the maximum working temperatures we can reach get higher and higher. In this video, we're attempting to construct a permanent solution to our needs and build a multi-purpose kiln and furnace that will unlock many materials we'll need to master and utilize in our ongoing journey to unlock the different technologies of civilization. Previously, I've explored a wide variety of different materials for building furnaces and kilns. The most basic was just using the earth itself and burying pottery below it to fire it. We've also experimented with earthen insulating materials like cob, made from clay, sand, and straw, and a few different configurations for melting bronze and smelting iron. We've also just started getting into brick making with fired ceramic bricks, allowing even more heat-resistant structures to be formed. But so far, all these attempts have been very temporary, each a laborious process to construct the furnace, which only lasts a handful of firings at best. Now, finally, with a permanent location where we can build, what we really need is a long-term solution for getting things hot. So the first step of the process is perfecting our brick making recipe so we can officially unlock ceramic bricks in our tech tree and start using that for the rest of the process. We've now experimented with a few different recipes for bricks, mixing various ratios of clay with sand, lime, and grog. But our initial attempts weren't the strongest or the most heat resistant of bricks. This time we tried a batch with a new recipe which involves a much higher ratio of grog, which is made by crushing fired ceramics into a powder.
This plays way better than the one I used last time.
After burying them and pit firing on top of them, we yield a much stronger brick. Putting the fire brick to a high heat test in the coal forge, we can see that it can handle being heated up to a glowing red without any damage to its structural integrity. I think we can officially unlock bricks in our tech tree and move forward with some larger projects.
Alright, so cleared an area here to build the kiln. Got a little build-up mound here that we'll build part of it on top of, so we don't have to fill it in with extra brick. So just gonna fill that in with rubble. So we're basically gonna do kind of a combination of a Roman glass furnace, which is just a big dome that you have a big fire, and it contains the heat, and you have crucibles along the edges that are filled with your molten glass that you can then work. And there'll be a few holes for glory holes to kind of reheat it as you work things. But we're also building it as a combination, and its first purpose is gonna be for ceramics. So it's gonna have an attached second chamber. They'll be on top of this mound here. It'll actually be the container where the wares are stored, and the heat will transfer from the firebox or the dome into there, heat everything and fire them, and then we'll exit out a chimney. They'll be behind it, making a cross-draft kiln. Kind of a hybrid design. I don't think there's many glass blowers that are also potters. An interesting fusion of a few different skill sets. Hopefully we can get it to work. Let's lay it out and start laying some bricks. So after a bit of work, we finished the first chamber. When this is in the kill mode, this is the firebox, basically, where you build the fire and produce the heat, which then gets pushed into the second chamber, which we'll build next, which is the llearch chamber. That actually holds the pottery that we're firing. Build some sort of arch over it, make it nice and fancy. We'll see how well that goes. We have gaps in the bricks here for the heat to come through, as well as some of the ash, hopefully, so we can get a natural ash glaze to our pottery as well. And next up will be the chimney with vents down here as well, and that'll create what's called a cross draft. That allows the heat generated to go through here, and it'll kind of circulate and get trapped in here, allowing it to build to a higher temperature before it's eventually pushed out here. When we're doing the glass blowing, most of what we're working with is just going to be this first container, be kind of inspired by a Roman furnace. And those are oftentimes built just with cob, which we've used for things like the bloomery, which have a fair amount of insulating factor, but they are not very durable. And after a few firings, they get brittle and start to crack, and you have to replace them. We use the ceramic bricks. They're durable to higher temperature because they've been fired. We're gonna cover it with cob to help add an extra factor of insulation. So next up, we'll build the llearch chamber, the chimney, and cover everything in cob. All right, so next up we gotta do the arch. Not something I've done before, so it should be probably a little bit of a challenge. Basically gonna use some slightly angular bricks, allowing it to build an arch over it, get a little bit more structural integrity. We just have to support it when it's there, and once it's dried, we can take out the supports, but it should offer something that's pretty secure. So got the last little pieces of it together now, and it should be ready for an initial firing. We have the first chamber, which is extra insulated with some of the cob. It's a relatively thin layer right now, so it might be something we build up as we go to get a little bit thicker and more insulated. And then there's a few other improvements we might want to make along the way. Kind of a custom design to try and meet multiple needs. One improvement that could be made is putting a sort of shelf in here that the wood then gets put on top of, and all the ashes can run through. Then the hole at the bottom would either be for clearing out the ash or potentially forcing air, in which case this hole that was originally more for glass blowing might be how you actually feed more of the fire into it. Here we have the actual chamber for the wares. We have holes on either side that allows a draft to form and the heat to get sucked through. One improvement we might want to make is actually some form of wall that forces the air to kind of circulate inside the chamber, and that'll allow it to kind of get to a higher temperature before the hot air is sucked out. Another improvement would be something like a damper, so you can adjust how much air actually escapes. Probably eventually want potentially to add shelves and such into here for firing ceramics. And then the door right now is just going to be made by stacking a bunch of bricks in front of it, but eventually we'll probably want like a full piece that we can just slide in and out for easy access. Yeah, I mean, other than that, it's just kind of firing it up and see how well it works. Hopefully it draws the heat and retains it. And for this initial attempt, I'm gonna try something at a little bit lower temperature and just try and bake a pizza.
There's a lot of trial and error with projects like this. If you want to offer your help, join our Discord and join in the discussion on our upcoming projects.
All right, so we got pretty good inferno going now. So I got a few holes I can tell already. Smoke seems to be escaping. That'll need to be patched at some point to kind of maximize the amount of draft, just heat that goes into there. But for the most part, I can tell it is working. It has definite flames shooting through. And here, even with it wide open, it's already, so once we close that up, it's probably gonna be about hot enough for a pizza. We did our test pizza, did cook it, or at least burn it to some extent. It does not taste very good. I think the main issue is that because it's a pottery kiln, the big advantage of it is that you're getting wood ash that goes through it and out. So that coats your pottery and gives it a natural glaze, but it also coats your pizza, which does not leave a great taste.
Next, build a shelf in the main chamber so that the pizza can cook via just the fire and not the smoke exhaust. See if that gets a better result.
Bottom's still raw, top's all burnt. Not quite a perfect pizza.
So made one last adjustment to help cook the underside by preheating some thin ceramic pieces to help better cook the bottom side.
So after a bit of trial and error, finally have a successful pizza from the kiln or furnace or oven or whatever it's trying to be. So I think the biggest challenge moving forward is going to be controlling the temperature, because with pottery it's very important to very slowly increase the temperature so they don't explode. So kind of mastering the wood fire technique and knowing how much wood to put in, how fast, how much airflow, and everything is going to be really crucial. And that's part of the challenge with the pizza, is that just with that it's pretty hot. Our crust is now nicely cooked, and that's a pretty good pizza. A little crispy on the outside, but in the end we kind of met our first milestone with the kiln furnace oven, and that's something basic like a pizza with a controlled temperature. So next up is going to be ceramics. It'll be a lot more important to control the temperature, slowly increase it, and then try to get some really hot temperatures. And then after that we can see just how hot we can get. The next milestone after just basic ceramics is going to be glass. And trying to get something that hot, around 2000 degrees minimum, is really hard. That's kind of what I ran into before. That's what made making glass, clear glass, so difficult. It was hard to get that high of a temperature. Hopefully we can achieve something that was a struggle with modern technology, with propane furnaces and everything, that might actually be easier doing it primitively. We'll find out as we continue to raise the bar and move on to the next challenges. But until then, got some pizza. Thanks for watching. Not too bad.
Glass has been my long-term challenge on this channel, originally trying to make it from scratch and be optically clear enough to make lenses for various items from eyeglasses to a camera lens. But now with our Reset series, I face the new challenge of trying to make glass without modern tools, which is already proving to be just as big of a challenge. So let's see if I can pull off something the Romans excelled at: glass. In my previous attempts before the Reset, the kiln or furnace to melt the glass at high enough temperature has been one of the largest challenges. Our first attempts involved a few varieties of makeshift kilns made from propane torches and fire bricks, but most often they struggled to reach a high enough heat. I even went out to Utah and got to meet Grant of King of Random and use his foundry to make what was very close to a clear glass. But ultimately it was switching to a modern electric kiln that had the best result. No fumes or other impurities from the gas to worry about, it was just a matter of getting the right glass mix.
Just let it run overnight, hopefully have some clear glass.
Unfortunately, the electric kilns were often pushed to the maximum of their abilities, and quite a few low-end kilns were sacrificed in the various glass and obsidian experiments I did. Now with the Reset and having to attempt it in an historical way, my first attempt was to repurpose our iron-smelled bloomery was not very effective at all.
The shiny turd.
It heated unevenly and destroyed our crucibles while still not actually getting hot enough to melt the glass. Then I attempted to build one with bricks and finally achieved the early steps of glass melting and forming, but not quite hot enough to fully form and effectively work into something.
Cloudy chunk of glass here.
The last two kilns proved to be a bit fragile and were both inevitably destroyed in the process of firing them. After spending a fair amount of time and money just to construct them, I wanted to make sure our next attempt would endure for many future firings and probably a lot of attempts to finally achieve this, and also hoped it was something that could be used both for making glass and also firing ceramics. So I upgraded to some high quality bricks and finally got a permanent location it could be built at. Now it's just a matter of tweaking and adjusting it until we can reach the maximum temperatures we need. But first, to be ready for when we can finally make the glass, we're gonna need some glass tools. Most important, a blowpipe, a hollow metal tube used by glass blowers to force air into a gather of molten glass and start forming the shape of whatever container they're making. A complex forge, I challenged frequent guest Adri to try and forge one for us. Starting from a flat piece of stock iron, after beveling the edges, Adri carefully bends and works it over unto itself, eventually forge welding the two ends into a solid pipe. Next we'll need a crucible to hold the glass ingredients and get it to melt. For the materials of my glass, we've collected a variety of possible sources for them. Most historical and similar to the Romans would be the natron we collected from a lake in Wyoming, which is similar to the natron collected from the Nile that the Romans used for their glass. This salt is composed of primarily sodium carbonate, a fluxing agent that when mixed with sand lowers its melting point to an achievable working temperature. An absolutely crucial ingredient for making glass. Other sources of fluxes we've explored is from the ashes of glasswort collected off the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, and a similar pickleweed we found in Utah, both of which are burned and the ashes collected as a source of sodium carbonate. Also, one of my first attempts was with a similar fluxing agent, potassium carbonate, made from the collected and filtered ashes of hardwood trees. But by far the most powerful and effective flux I found was borax, which I was able to collect in Boron, California. Technically available to the Romans at the time, borax was not really an ingredient used for historical glasses. One of the first challenges with my kiln was getting the temperature control right. For trying to use it for ceramics, this proved to be a fatal error when things heated up much faster than anticipated and destroyed our initial batch of pottery we were trying to fire. This first initial heating of the kiln is crucial for ceramics, and a process called candling needs to be done, where candles or a small fire are used to slowly and gradually heat the kiln, driving out any moisture in the pottery that would otherwise cause it to explode. I attempted this with a collection of candles, but that proved to be too little heat for the size of my kiln. Then moved on to a small fire and practiced at slowly heating it. For making glass, this will also be important so that the crucibles containing my glass mix don't also explode because of thermal shock. Inside the kiln, I place pyrometric cones. These are calibrated to specific temperatures and will start to melt to let me know what temperature range we were able to reach. Now on to test firing the kiln and honing it in. Alright, so I did a couple of test firings to see how all this is working, and had a few issues, mostly a lot of smoke escaping, which also means there's a lot of heat getting out. Did a little bit of practicing with a candling method to try and slowly ramp up for making pottery. So our first attempt blew up a lot of our pottery because it got a lot hotter, a lot quicker than expected. So I've gone through and patched a lot of things, filled in the rest of the arch and built a bit of a door here, which should hopefully seal up this chamber a little bit better. Should be minimal smoke coming out of it. I also narrowed in the door hole so we lose less heat and less smoke comes out of it. Most of the smoke is now going through the chimney, which was supposed to, so that's a good sign. And then I'm also in the process of adding a lot of layers to the outside of it. The outsides are pretty vertical, so it's hard to get the clay to actually stick to it and build it out. So I've been stacking sticks, which creates a lot of air pockets, which is good for insulation. So next up, we use a crucible that Lauren made, fill it with our sand and flux we've previously gathered, see if we can get hot enough to melt it. But ideally we want to get to the Roman era glass, which doesn't use borax, and just soda ash and lime with the sand. Should only need to get up to technically around 1700, fairly low temperature goal. My initial firings, I really only got up to around 1000, but I think it's going to take a while to kind of just heat up the entire thing. Then the temperature will start going up from there. Ideally want something up to 2000, possibly 2400 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's load this up, give it a shot, and see if we can reach any temperatures that high. All right, so we're going on 9 hours now of continuously baking in the furnace, reaching about 1400 degrees. So I'm hopeful we can potentially have some glass. 1400 I think is about the lowest melting point with the borax. Hopefully we have something, potentially put the blow rod to use and maybe blow something. Still kind of new to glass blowing, so I'm not expecting too much. Let's give it a shot and see what we got after all this work. It's definitely hot. That's a nice glow just on the brick itself. Crucible's still there, so that's a good sign. Oops, that's the wrong end. This metal is soft. Oh,
Look at that. That is glass. So the borax kind of separates, so I gotta mix it up a bit. I don't know if I can be able to, this is very gooey. It's a good sign, but I did not think we were gonna get a good result here. Very promising. Oh. Yeah, it's too liquidy. I think it's the borax. So ideally we would bake it a lot hotter, get something a little bit more workable. If I just let it cool a little bit, it'll thicken up. Didn't think too hot would be the issue here. Damn. I think kind of a lost cause trying to glass blow this guy. That is definitely glass though. It's got a little bit of yellowness to it, which is from the borax. We have reached kind of the minimum threshold for success. After this, we gotta try more accurate Roman recipe, and that'll be something we can actually glass work a bit better. But this is a lot better than I was expecting. That is glass, very black. I think that's just from all the soot in the fire. That's really cool. That actually turned out a lot better than I expected. I was pretty pessimistic. It definitely took a while to get up to temperature and heat the entire thing up to heat. We did it in half a day, and we got glass. So the candling process is something we need to work a little bit more on because all of our ceramic crucibles ended up breaking. So we ended up switching to the steel one just because it would not break. Got a little soft in the process, but it did hold up. So these crucibles are going to need a little bit of work. So I'm very curious what the actual temperature reading of it is.
Based on the color that the steel of the crucible got, I can estimate we probably reach temperatures around 1700 to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit.
But this is very promising. I'm definitely sure there are some tweaks we can do to improve it. I'm sure we can just continue to add insulation to make it even better. But I think the next step is going to be using an actual Roman glass recipe. That'll be a bit higher to temperature, and to actually work it is going to be a little bit of a challenge. The borax makes this a little too soft, so not the best glass working. But I'm probably gonna try and find someone a little bit more experienced to help me, even though I have done this a few times. It'd be nice to have a pro to help me. Yeah, so I'm very happy with this result. There's been a lot of money to get just to here, a lot of labor to assemble it, a lot of clay and sand to make the insulation around it, lots of days of adding to it, making it thicker and thicker, and then all of the wood. There's about $140 worth of wood, huge pile, all pretty much gone now, but actually did get something out of it. That's very promising. So hopefully we can hone in even better and start getting some glass made and some ceramics fired. Thank you to all of our supporters on Patreon. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. I want to see us continuing in our advancement through civilization. Support us on Patreon. We really need your help. This attempt seemed to get close, but still struggled to achieve the desired temperatures. After an unrelated fire destroyed my workshop, I had to dismantle the kiln and put these attempts aside for some time, intent on not publishing another video unless I could finally achieve success. At the start of this, I had trouble finding too much information that was relevant to this project. But in the time since, more archaeological research had become available online, and I was able to do a little bit deeper dive into the research and hopefully rebuild this kiln into something that might finally work. Glass is fascinating. Through this series, I've been able to explore the origin and creation of many different materials, from ceramics to copper, bronze, and iron. But glass has always stood out as the most unique and challenging. I first dove into the world of glassmaking 8 years ago, and in the years since, I have been diving deeper and deeper into this topic. I'm collecting new ingredients across many states in the country and getting help and advice from multiple glassblowers, YouTubers, and science authors. After taking a hiatus the past couple years, I'm finally returning to this topic and diving deeper than ever before, because I realized I've only scratched the surface of understanding glass. So I'm going for broke. After several attempts of getting close but not quite there, I'm not stopping until I can achieve the task of turning raw sand into workable material. This is not going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of resources. It's going to take several attempts. It's going to take meeting with some of the top experts in the world, going hands-on with their recreations, and hopefully if I can get everything to go right, I can finally recreate the 3,500-year-old art of glassmaking.
One of my biggest goals at the start was attempting to make optically clear glass. Along the way, I found a very specific solution, but in the grand picture of glassmaking, I realized I've only scratched the surface on this material. The solution I found to optically clear glass was using a combination of an electric kiln with a compound of borax as a flux, resulting in a nearly perfect optically clear glass, which I was then able to melt and cast into lenses for a camera. Ultimately, the bottleneck for my glassmaking attempts has been reaching high enough temperatures for it, normally requiring at least 2300 degrees Fahrenheit. Most electric kilns max out just below this temperature, so only with a large amount of borax as a flux to lower the glass's melting point was I able to achieve these results. The downside of this excess borax is that it causes the glass to be a much more runny liquid, and pretty much unusable for glass blowing or anything really outside of casting, greatly limiting my ability to utilize this material. So with my reset series and taking things back to the fundamental origins of technologies, I revisited glassmaking with a new perspective, trying to make glass with ancient technologies. Since then, I've tried multiple ways to attempt to make glass, from cob and brick furnaces to using charcoal and wood fuel. All of these attempts have managed to just touch on the beginning temperature range of making glass, each time getting a little closer and closer, but ultimately never forming actual glass. At the end of last year, I went about relocating my kiln and rebuilding it with a new design that would hopefully be more successful based on some additional research. But first, let's get the sand we'll need for turning into glass. For that, I got a unique invite by creator Save It For Parts.
My name is Gabe. I've got the Save It For Parts channel on YouTube.
To check out a nearby project that he and a group of people have been working on.
So this is Sandland. This particular part of it is the sand bar. This has been a project I've been working on for probably a few years now.
Digging out their own elaborate tunnel system in a sandstone deposit. Tunneling out sandstone for making glass is actually a common source of pure silica sand, and for most of the 20th century, Ford tunneled out local sandstone deposits near me in Minnesota for the windshields of the vehicles they manufactured here. The other crucial ingredient for glassmaking is the flux, a compound that lowers the melting point of glass. I've previously sourced several varieties before from the ashes of hardwood trees, the ashes of salt-loving plants, and the salts from a Wyoming lake. With all the ingredients collected, we are ready to finally dedicate another full day to trying to make glass. It's a surprisingly exhausting and kind of expensive process. You'll likely burn most of your exposed hair off, and if everything doesn't quite come together perfectly, there's a decent chance we'll end up with basically nothing.
So I have the kiln remade now with a few layers of cob. The whole thing is a little bit smaller, a little bit different arrangement, hopefully get a better result for our glass making. This right here is gonna be kind of the glory hole. Once it gets up to temperature, we can do our glass working in theory from this hole. Right now I've been kind of preheating it with propane just to save on firewood and got it around 700 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is a pretty good starting point. Time to switch to wood. And then here we have some of the sand I collected from Sandland mixed in with some soda ash, and you can see how well that turns out. The sand is not quite as white as some of the other stuff we've gotten, so I suspect it's going to be kind of probably green in the final result, which is from the iron impurities in it. So to load these up, I got a little bit of a shelf in here.
To try and improve our odds of success, we tried to put together a sophisticated bellows based on a few historic designs, using the water mill I had built and the bellows Good and Basic made for me when I was last in Utah. Unfortunately, because they weren't really built for each other, I think the water mill was too large and the bellows were too small. So while we got it to work, unfortunately we didn't get a strong enough airflow, so we ended up switching to an electric blower to hopefully give us that needed extra boost.
We're about 6 hours into the burn, and you can see our biggest crucible ended up breaking. Very unfortunate. Looks like it broke all the way through, so I don't think we even have anything on the bottom. That's very unfortunate because that was the first one to melt and the most promising.
So it's been 7.5 hours. Let's take another peek at this. It's getting there.
Still pretty solid at this point. It's getting pretty low, so I think it's actually boiled down a lot. So that one is pretty good. Say maybe give it another hour. So we're coming up on 9 hours, I think, of this melt. And I think we're going to take a peek and hopefully have some actual glass. This one's nice and gooey. This is the Sandlands mixture. Looks like it's still got a lot of bubbles in it, but still pretty goopy. Yeah, that one needs some more time, I think.
As the night wore on and our firewood supply started to run low, it became obvious we were not going to be achieving success. We were able to get a reading of at least 2100 degrees Fahrenheit, so we were definitely achieving our highest temperatures yet, and the glass was looking closer and closer to being fully formed. Chances are, if we had the manpower and the fuel supply ready to continue running for another day, we would likely achieve success. But alas, we didn't, and this turned into yet another near victory. It seemed likely if we picked this up for one more day, we could potentially achieve our goal. But I want to once and for all achieve this difficult task. So I made an impulsive last-minute trip to visit the experts in the world's largest museum of all things glass, the Corning Museum of Glass. Conveniently, they fairly recently started exploring the same topic of ancient glass blowing and started doing demonstrations of wood-fired glass blowing for the summer. So this offered a rare chance to both talk to these experts and experience it firsthand to see what information I might be missing. So I came to the museum with a long list of questions I wanted to see if they could answer, and they connected me with several experts to interview. But first, they had me participate in their interactive glassmaking exhibit to help give me a bit of a refresher on my glassworking skills.
First up, I wanted to talk about the origin of glassmaking, where it started and how this art arose. I'm hoping this will give me some clues on this early process. The history of glass is long. The Corning Museum has an exhibit covering 35 centuries of glassmaking, and Kate walked me through a large part of it. The common theme I learned through everything is that making glass is hard, and it's expensive. It requires incredibly hot temperatures held for long periods of time. That requires a lot of fuel to be sourced, and usually several non-stop days of people feeding and tending the furnace. Where glass was discovered, invented, and then developed is largely a factor of how it could be found to be economically worth the large amount of labor and expense that it takes to produce it.
So the earliest glass dates back to about the 16th century BCE, so 1500, 1600 or so. Archaeologists sort of go back and forth on whether glassmaking starts in Egypt first or in the area that's basically now modern Syria. Here's a chunk of raw glass from a famous site in Egypt called Tel Amarna. This is way before glassblowing starts.
What I found was fascinating is that there's this kind of presumption that glass was accidentally made one day, and then they just figured out how to replicate it and use it. The truth I learned is a little bit more complicated. It involves a bit of an evolution of material.
Most of these you'll notice are opaque, translucent, they're not colorless, they're different materials, and that's largely because glass is probably trying to imitate more precious materials. Lapis, turquoise, and later rock crystal, which is when we get into the more colorless glasses. It's still, we think, a little bit less expensive, a little bit cheaper to produce than high quality materials from places like Afghanistan, which is the only place you can get lapis lazuli in the ancient world.
This is a history of glass I had never actually heard before. The glass production first existed as basically counterfeiting precious gems.
But what I find fascinating is that I've actually made lapis lazuli using the chemical process that was figured out in the 1800s to produce ultramarine, formerly one of the most expensive pigments in the world. Which seems crazy that it's actually possible to recreate this rare gem like they were trying. But what's more crazy is that I'd say the process is actually easier than what they went through to accidentally invent glass.
Till we get pieces like this that date to about 400 or 500 BCE or so. These are the first true examples of glass that have been intentionally decolorized to look like rock crystal. Now we're in the Greek world, and the word for glass has changed. So it's no longer related to lapis lazuli, it's now related to rock crystal. So there's an emulation that's happening here.
I find it interesting that, like myself, making clear glass wasn't the initial result. It wasn't until they tried to emulate other rare materials that there was an incentive to find ways to decolorize the glass.
So they're adding antimony, like a form of antimony oxide, in order to get the glass to be decolorized and to counteract the effects of that iron in the sand. So most of the glass, you're going to get these naturally colored blues and greens that are coming from the iron in the sand. It really impacts whether you have an oxidizing or a reducing environment. So if you've got a oxidizing environment, when you've got that oxygen free in the air, you're going to end up with the more blues and greens from in your naturally colored iron-rich glass. If you're in a reducing environment, so you don't have a lot of that free oxygen available, it's going to get more yellow and brown.
Another question I had for them was about my ingredients. I've emphasized a lot in my journeys the importance of just the right ingredients and of chemically purifying them. But I was curious what the process looked like in ancient times, when purification wasn't always possible.
8th, 9th century, so almost all glass making in the Mediterranean and Roman world is centered in Egypt and what's now modern Israel and Lebanon, because they had access in particular to these sands that have the right kind of mix of silica and probably lime. So we think that most of these glasses are really 2 ingredient glasses. They're not 3 ingredient glasses. The lime is coming in with the sand, and they're not doing a lot of cleaning of it. They're really, as best we can tell, just mixing the 2, bringing it up to temperature for a long time.
Initially, glass was cast, similar to bronze and other metals.
Earliest evidence we have of glass blowing comes from a site in Jerusalem that dates to about the mid-1st century BCE or so. And they're experimenting with glass blowing in a way that doesn't seem like it was really commercially viable. Skip forward about 50 years and we start to see early blown glass appearing in places like Rome, in northern Italy, even in Switzerland. So it spreads really quickly. Blown glass allows you to do is make a whole bunch of different varieties of shapes and forms that weren't possible before.
Next, I wanted to learn about the actual kiln and refueling process. My last minute trip fortunately allowed me to catch one of the last live demonstrations on wood-fired glass blowing they were doing at the Corning Glass Museum.
Erik first talked to me about the historical kiln the museum first built and ran for their initial experiment.
It's just one historical record of what an ancient glass forming furnace looked like, and it's on a little terracotta oil lamp. So there's a depiction of glass workers working around a furnace like this, and that's fundamentally what this is based on. It really surprises people that you can melt glass with wood. It's not something that you think you could do, that this would achieve temperatures high enough. If you just build something that insulates a little bit and contains that heat and use the right sorts of fuels, the right sorts of wood, you can really achieve high temperatures.
For most of glass history, glass making and glass blowing was done in separate processes and in different kilns. Actually making the glass requires a higher heat and a longer burn cycle, and it was generally more economical to do it in huge batches. Then pre-made glass could be formed into whatever desired shape in a smaller furnace.
The way they worked in the ancient world was to melt glass, to let it cool, to break it up, and to send this raw material, which today we call cullet, to different glass-making workshops around the empire, around the Roman Empire, where that cullet would be reheated in a furnace like this and then formed into objects. And you can melt from batch in this furnace. It's just hard to find it out, right? So you need the higher temperatures to really getting all the little bubbles, which we call seeds, out of the glass and making it really nice and clear. You need those higher temperatures and you need to stay there longer.
For the public demonstration, they rebuilt the kiln in a more durable material so it could be used weekly without breaking.
This is 2.0. This is made out of modern materials. It's got a 40-inch main body and then a 27-inch stoke tunnel. The ports and the flue are being taken up by exhaust coming out. The makeup air is coming through the stoke tunnel, and because there's a constriction, it creates our draft. I mean, that's a pretty fair amount of velocity. And so the sort of igloo shape of having a big chamber and a small chamber will just naturally create that, because this constriction becomes a high point of movement. I'll light up at 8 in the morning. I'll start it gentle for 2 hours. I'll do 2 hours to 500 or so. And then in the next hour, I'll ramp up to like 8, 9, 1,000. Once we hit about 11, then I kind of just start really stoking it. It's like off to the races. And we're trying to go 1,700 to 2,000. It's every 8 to 14 minutes. I'm stoking, I'm stirring. And I made this sort of rake. With that, I'll dig all the way to the bottom at the far end, pull, I really rake, pull things around, I shuffle the top over and under, and so I'll pull from the bottom and then push the top. And I try to turn over my coals every 14 minutes. We want to have about, what would you say, 4 or 5 inch bed of coals, 4, 5, 6 inch bed of coals throughout the whole inner chamber. And then we reserve the second half of the stoke tunnel. We'll put our new wood in, and we lay it out a lot in like a kind of crosshatch pattern, so we get a lot of air movement, and that air, you can see the flame will be getting sucked in, and that's our draw, and that really ramps up our heat. You know, for you wanting to hit those higher temperatures, I think if you did it in that sort of a round shape and you did it out somewhere in the open so that you could put a flue on here, you would create even more volume moving through, more velocity, and I think you would hit those temperatures. We're using ash. It's hardwood, it's nice, it's hot. And then the other key is really, it's chopping things small. And so you'll see there's not like a lot of like full quarter rounds. So everything is split pretty small. It's a lot of chopping, but it works out pretty good. The furnace taught me, every time we fired it, the furnace has taught me some sort of a lesson where I was like, oh man, like I didn't see that, or I didn't think that. It proved, its experience will just give you a ton of knowledge, wisdom, you know, yeah, it teaches you.
One major question I had going in was what the ideal source of fuel and air was for glass blowing. I previously covered the importance of making charcoal and adding forced air to it, which allows you to reach much higher temperatures needed for smelting metals such as copper or steel. At its surface, a wood fire shouldn't be able to reach a high enough temperatures required for glass blowing. However, every reference I've seen says wood was the fuel source for glass making, with no bellows or forced air. Talking to everyone confirmed my suspicions though. The answer to this question seems to not be that charcoal wouldn't work, but that it's unnecessary. Going back to the main theme of the process, it seems to be about economics. Producing charcoal is an extra step that adds more labor to the process. Adding a bellows requires someone to either man the bellows over multiple days of the burn continuously, or you have to be limited to a location that has a water source to power the bellows. Instead, the most economic way to run a glass furnace was to construct the furnace where there was ample supplies of firewood. And whenever that dried up, you move to a new source. And then you run your furnace in a way that allows the firewood to first burn into coals. And in the process of burning, produces enough heat that you have a natural draft and don't need bellows.
Before I left Corning, New York, I also paid a visit to the attached Krakow Research Library, which contains the world's largest collection of media on all things glass. It was explained to me that this is a place the Library of Congress calls if they ever have a question related to glass. I had a short window to visit before my flight, and the librarians basically piled upon me all the knowledge of glass I could ever want. I tried to skim through as much as I could, but I was honestly overwhelmed with a sudden exposure to all this new info. Particularly of interest to me was the original cuneiform tablets that supposedly have the oldest recipes for glass making. Kate referred to it a few times when I talked to her.
There are cuneiform tablets that date to about 700, 800 BCE or so. They're much more concerned with the fuel, with like making sure that like information about the fuel and also the ritual that's associated with glass making. So there's a little bit of like, oh yeah, and then we threw this stuff in. But really we focused on the important stuff.
This also gave me a few clues on possible issues in my process. I completely omitted the sheep sacrifice required for a successful burn. So if this still doesn't work, I'm gonna have to try those steps too.
So we're back here at day 2 of the glass attempt with the furnace. Made a few modifications based on what I learned from the Corning. Big thing is adding kind of an igloo entrance, and with that you put kind of the fire in this, right in the igloo, and have it turn into coals, and then you brush the coals back further. It helps create a bit of a draw. A big thing is we're also going to have this be a natural draw, no bellows, no fan or anything. They did suggest that we add a chimney just to increase that effect. So we got a little bit of a chimney here. In the back, we have the working hole, glory hole, and that moved up just a little bit. So we are working more with the hotter part of it. I think theirs is a little bit taller than ours, and the inside is a little bit bigger. That also opens up this side chamber to potentially be used for annealing. We have more airflow, and in theory, it should work a lot better. And I think it's important to note that we did succeed in our first attempt. We were reaching temperatures high enough to make glass, and it was just a matter of needing to do it for a long enough time. So we're basically picking up right where we left off with the glasses pretty close to being ready to blow. Thanks to what I learned from the Corning Museum, we're able to just make things a lot more efficient. I think we should be able to get this up to temperature very quickly and hopefully do some more successful glass blowing.
The biggest takeaway from Corning was it's all about the fuel. You have to use the right type of wood, of the right size and the right dryness, or you'll never succeed and reach high enough temperatures. So we made sure to use only hardwood, and Elliot chopped everything down to small pieces. The second attempt ran a whole lot differently. We were able to achieve a very strong draft without the use of bellows, much to our surprise. And the igloo shape and refueling strategy made feeding the fire a lot more manageable, as you aren't feeding straight into the inferno.
First attempt was a lot more explosive than the second attempt, but the second attempt definitely went a lot better. The additions to the furnace really helped out a lot, just with keeping the fire going, and it didn't need an electric blower that time.
The biggest surprise and learning curve was knowing that we didn't actually need forced air to fuel the whole thing, and just the fact that we can run it on just cut lumber as opposed to, coal, charcoal, or some kind of fuel. the idea that we have to run this for hours and hours and hours before we get everything up to temperature and get a good bed of coals built up in it and everything. I think that was very surprising for me as well. Definitely a rite of passage, getting our hair burnt off our arms. A little less intense on the second try than it was the first.
Yeah, that first one we were kind of rock, paper, scissoring to see. I don't want to put the wood in, you put the wood in. All right, I'll do it.
However, as the day progressed, things still weren't turning out quite right like they did at Corning. Our pile of charcoal was getting massive and not burning down as fast as it did for them, even with very aggressive raking. Towards the end, the temperature was still lagging a lot lower than what we were aiming, still hovering around 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. Despite learning all this new knowledge and making these new improvements, it still seemed we were still going to fall short of success and not reach the necessary temperatures. But then we ended up switching our wood supply to a different source, and suddenly things took off and started shooting even more massive flames, and the temperature finally started to climb to these higher temperatures. The only issue was that we were at the end of our firewood supply. But Gabe from Save for Parts came in at the 11th hour with some of his wood to help us get us to the finish line. As it started to get late into the night, we were finally there. Our glass was hot and molten, and I could take a decent gather on a blowpipe. Actually blowing the glass proved to be a bit of a challenge, however, mostly due to the arrangement of our furnace. At Corning, they had some nice heat shields and equipment to cool the blowpipes. Our setup still needed some tweaking to get things just right. Attempting to blow the glass ended up with me pretty much continuously burning my hands. There was also a struggle of maintaining the heat while we were blowing, feeding it just at the right times to maintain the heat.
Yeah, just don't forget the fun stuff. Looks like it's coming. Yep. You good there? Good. Cool.
It's a bit easier to do when it's burning flat.
Yeah!
It was not a perfect success, but I still feel like this was a massive success compared to the past, I don't even know how many years I've been trying to do this. I've been trying to get glass blowing and work like this for a very long time, and it's very satisfying to finally been able to achieve it and shape it and work it and even blow it a little bit. I think there's a few flaws in the actual kiln itself that make it a little bit hard to work and just kind of lacking some tools like rapidly cool, and just kind of experience is a big thing too. I was able to do this with a lot of coaching and assistance in New York, but on my own it's a little bit more challenging. So if they were able to have like a team that was know exactly how to stoke it and how to work it, and that kind of experience just takes time to learn. So for a first time, I think this is a massive success. I'm very warm and I'm covered in burns. The end results aren't much to look at, but this is still a pretty groundbreaking achievement. With some more practice and tweaking, it shouldn't take long before I can start actually making usable glass items myself out of sand. Thank you to the Corning Museum of Glass for their help in getting me to this milestone, and thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon. This was a massive project that took a lot longer and cost more than ever, but with your support, I'm able to keep doing these deeper dives with hopefully more success along the way. So consider supporting if you want to see more videos like this. So thanks to the Corning Glass Museum, I was able to do a really deep dive into the history of glass and get what I feel is a very complete picture
of historical glassmaking and everything else involved. And with their suggestions and being able to see it hands-on, able to recreate my own kiln. So I think I was finally able to answer the question of how it was done historically, using actually wood instead of charcoal. Ultimately, it just requires a really long burn time. So in my previous video to this, I've been exploring more modern ways to actually do more glass blowing in studio without having an entire team dedicated to doing an all-day firing just to make some actual glass. So I think kind of the last piece of this ongoing saga is being able to make a glass blowing studio here, be able to do my own glass blowing here, develop the skill, and be able to use it in upcoming projects moving forward. So I think I've got the first step of that. Now becomes a practice, and hopefully we'll have some glass in upcoming projects. So if you made it through the whole video, thanks for watching. This has been a very long journey, but I think it's very satisfying to see how it all kind of comes together. So once I'm a little bit more practiced at my skills, I'm hoping to kind of pull everything together once more and use the ancient glass blowing kiln to turn raw sand into optically clear glass that I'm able to work and glass blow myself. I think if I can achieve that, I can finally put the saga to rest. So stay tuned for that.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and check out other content we have covering a wide variety of topics. Also, if you've enjoyed these series, consider supporting us on Patreon. We are largely a fan-funded channel and depend on the support of our viewers in order to keep our series going. Thanks for watching.